The courtroom fell silent, every eye fixed on him. A black man standing for his day in court suddenly found himself slammed to the floor by police right in front of the judge, the jury, and the nation watching live. The impact echoed through the room, a stark reminder that even here, where justice should reign, inequality still held power. Gasps, cries, and stunned murmurs filled the space. In the next few minutes, what seemed like an ordinary trial would spiral into a national reckoning, and the very idea of justice in America would be forced to confront its own reflection. He had been waiting for this day for years, the day he would finally stand in a courtroom and plead his case, believing in the fairness of the system that had promised protection and equality. The walls were cold, lined with polished oak, the air heavy with the smell of varnish and anxiety. Sunlight cut through the tall windows, casting rigid shadows over the rows of seats where family, supporters, and curious onlookers had gathered. Every face told a story, some hopeful, others skeptical, all watching to see if justice would prevail. The man's heart pounded in his chest, each beat echoing like a drum against the solemn silence. He thought of his childhood, the countless obstacles he had overcome, the nights spent fighting against a world that had repeatedly tried to define him by the color of his skin. Today was supposed to be different. Today the law would see him. But even in this formal chamber, he felt the weight of eyes filled with doubt. The police officers, calm yet rigid, lined the perimeter, a reminder of authority ready to assert itself. The judge presided over the room with a measured gaze, but the tension was palpable, thick as smoke, threatening to ignite at any moment. Every small sound, the shuffle of papers, the clearing of throats, felt amplified, a prelude to something monumental. The moment his body hit the floor, the courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Gasps echoed off the walls, some sharp, some muffled, as disbelief rippled through the room. The black man struggled to rise, his hands trembling, not just from pain but from the surreal weight of what had just happened. Cameras rolling, live feeds transmitting the scene to millions across the country, turned the courtroom into a theater of collective shock. What should have been a place of justice had become a stage for humiliation and fear. He remembered the countless times he had been told that courts were blind, impartial, that justice would protect him if he followed the rules. And yet, here it was. Proof that fairness was conditional, fragile, and for many, unattainable. The officers' expressions were unreadable, but their movements were deliberate, a reminder that authority often thrived on control rather than truth. He tried to steady himself, to find words that could explain, that could remind everyone in the room that he was more than this moment of violence. Outside, the news spread like wildfire. Social media lit up with video clips, screenshots, and hashtags. People argued, debated, protested, and mourned in real time. It wasn't just a man on the floor. It was a mirror reflecting a system that often failed those it claimed to serve. Families watched in horror, recognizing the pattern of injustice they had long feared for their own children. Back inside the courtroom, every tick of the clock stretched time, turning minutes into an eternity. The judge's gavel, usually a symbol of order, felt powerless against the surge of emotion, outrage, and disbelief. Witnesses sat frozen, unsure whether to speak, to act, or simply absorb the shock. Lawyers exchanged glances, some horrified, others calculating, aware that this incident had forever changed the context of the trial. Yet amid the fear and anger, there was a subtle, unspoken resilience. The man's eyes scanned the room, locking briefly with the faces of those who had come to support him. He felt a quiet, stubborn determination rising within him, an understanding that this moment, as painful and humiliating as it was, could become more than just a personal tragedy. It could become a catalyst, a spark that forced a conversation, a challenge to the very foundations of a system that had long overlooked the humanity of people who looked like him. Outside the walls, protests began forming within hours. Conversations erupted in homes, schools, and offices. The incident became more than news. It became a symbol, a question posed to a nation about fairness, accountability, and the unseen weight of history pressing on the present. And while the courtroom descended into procedural chaos, the man realized that the fight ahead would demand more than patience or legal arguments. It would require the courage to demand recognition, humanity, and justice on a scale larger than any one trial. Time seemed to stretch and warp as the courtroom descended into chaos. The black man's pulse hammered in his ears, drowning out every other sound except the sharp echo of the officer's movements and the stunned murmurs of those around him. He could feel every eye in the room on him, not with empathy, but with judgment, expectation, and for some, disbelief. The cameras captured each second, broadcasting the raw reality of the system's failure to a nation that could not look away. The officer, rigid and unflinching, stood as if the law itself justified the violence, while the man on the floor struggled to find footing, both literally and figuratively. His body throbbed with pain, but the deeper ache was one of humiliation, of seeing the promise of justice collapse in a single violent moment. Every memory of hope, of fighting to be seen as human, clashed violently with the reality before him. The courtroom, meant to embody fairness, had become a theater of oppression, exposing the fragile line between authority and abuse. Voices rose, some demanding accountability, others trying to restore order, but none could erase the raw injustice that had just played out. The judge's gavel struck, attempting to reclaim control, but it was powerless against the surge of emotion and outrage that filled the room. He could see the expressions of family and supporters, their eyes wide, their faces etched with disbelief and fear. The incident had transcended a single trial. It had become a mirror reflecting the systemic inequalities embedded in a society that claimed justice as a right, but often delivered it as a privilege. And then, in the silence that followed the initial chaos, a spark ignited. It was subtle, a whispered outrage, a nod of solidarity, but it grew quickly, spreading among those in the courtroom and beyond. The nation, now watching live, felt the tension ripple through every corner of society. In that charged moment, he realized the significance of what had happened. This was no longer just his story. It was a reckoning, a moment that demanded recognition, reflection, and change. Pain, fear, and anger coalesced into something larger, a collective call for justice that could no longer be ignored. The room, once a symbol of law and order, had become a crucible. And as the man rose, battered but unbroken, the weight of that moment settled in. The fight ahead would be harder, but it was no longer his alone. The nation was watching. The courtroom emptied slowly, leaving echoes of what had just unfolded. The black man walked out, his body bruised but his spirit unbroken, carrying with him more than just the scars of that day. He carried the weight of a system forced into the light, the undeniable proof that inequality was not an abstract idea but a lived reality. Outside, cameras captured the stunned faces of bystanders, the whispers of outrage and solidarity mingling in the air. Across the country, millions replayed the footage, their emotions raw and conflicted, anger, disbelief, sorrow, and for some, a renewed determination to confront injustice. In the days that followed, conversations sparked in classrooms, workplaces, and dinner tables. Advocates called for reform, activists organized, and ordinary citizens debated the meaning of fairness, authority, and accountability. What had seemed like an isolated courtroom incident transformed into a national reckoning, a challenge to the very principles the nation claimed to uphold. The man, once just a single figure facing the machinery of power, became a symbol, not of despair, but of resilience and courage. He realized that change was never instantaneous. The path ahead would be long, and resistance would persist. But the impact of that moment, captured live for the world to see, could not be undone. It had awakened awareness, ignited dialogue, and reminded everyone watching that justice, when threatened, must be demanded, defended, and reclaimed. As the sun set on that turbulent day, one truth remained undeniable. The fight for equality is ongoing, and silence is no longer an option. Every action, every voice matters. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to see it. Leave a comment below with your thoughts. How do we hold systems accountable? And don't forget to like the video because every click amplifies the conversation we can't afford to ignore. The question now isn't whether change is possible, it's whether we are ready to demand it.